Hey there, thanks for stopping by my channel to color. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit the little bell next to it so you'll be notified whenever I upload a new video. So today we're going to be coloring this adorable girl with a butterfly. I made this image up on my iPad using the Procreate app. I thought I'd give it a try and see how it worked out. If you'd like to pick up the image or any of the supplies I used, I'll put a list of everything I could find down in the description box. Otherwise, I printed my image on some Neenah 80-pound solar white cardstock, so let's color. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started with C0. We're going to use that to go ahead and just give our girl a quick outline. I used this to go around the entire outside of the image and in between all the spaces where you're going to see the background. I like to do this first so that in case I get any on my girl or my image that I want to erase, I can go ahead and do that. And two, if I do it first, I don't have to worry about picking up any of the colors I've already colored and pulling them out into my background, which I know from experience is something that I do all the time. So for me, it's easier to just go ahead and do the outline first, and then I don't have to worry about it. I do the outlining because I think it adds a little bit of a shadow around it so it doesn't look quite so flat after I've gotten done coloring it. This is a step that you could completely leave off if you don't like how it looks. For me, personally, I just like how it gives it a little bit of something extra so it looks like she's popping off of the page just a little bit, not too much, but just a tiny tab. So I'm going around her hair there and I'm trying to work my way around to the other side. You want to make sure that you do the little space in between the braid and her neck, because that is background there, so make sure to grab that. And then you just work your way down her arm. Make sure to go behind her arm close to her dress, because that again is background color, so you'll want to shade that in a little bit. And I'm just going to go all the way down to the bottom of her boot. Alright, so for the skin we're going to use E11, 21, 00, and then for cheeks we'll use R20 and R30. I always color darkest to lightest, so I'm going to go ahead and start with my E11 first. We're going to go ahead and start down on her leg. I'm going to do a little dab of color underneath of her, down the back of her leg, and then underneath of her dress, so that it will add a little bit of shadow, and I'm going to give it a little dab of color around her little kneecap there. I'm going to do the same thing for the other leg, and then of course a little dab around the knee, and then I'm going to go ahead and grab E21. And we're going to add that next. When you do E21, you want to make sure that you go over the top of your E11 so that you'll soften the line a little bit. You don't have to color it all the way in, but I like to give it a little swap of color so that it will soften it up. I'm coloring most of her leg in, but I'm leaving a couple little areas of white so we can go ahead and add our E00. And then I'm going to take that and I'm going to swipe over her entire leg. So I'm going to go over the E11 and the E21 also and swipe over her entire leg, covering it all the way up with my E00. This helps me to blend all the colors together by swiping over them all with my lightest color. But then I decided that her leg is not dark enough, so I'm going to go ahead, since it's under a dress, it's going to be a little bit more shadowy, so I'm going to give it a second coat. So I'm going to go ahead and apply my E11 exactly where I did it the last time. I'm just going down under her skirt, along the back of her legs, and then under a little dab underneath of her knee. And then we'll go ahead and grab our E21 to soften that edge again. You'll go over E11, and you're just going to pull that color out into about the middle of her leg. I'm just carefully swiping and make sure to go over her kneecap there too, the little bump that I added. And I'm just swiping over all those lines just to soften them up. And then we'll go back over the entire leg with our E00 to soften and blend all those colors together. That just works best for me. You may want to try doing it a different way for yourself just to see what works best for you. But I've decided after coloring for quite some time that this is the best option for me, is to use my lightest color to go over the entire area afterwards so that it smooths all those colors together. Now we're going to go ahead and do her arms. We're going to start with E11. We want to add those where you want shadow, so I'm going to go underneath the sleeve of her shirt, and then I'm going to go along the back of her arm, and I'm going to grab a little bit on the little line that I made for her elbow right there. Do the same thing for the bottom. We do her hand, and I'm going down her thumb and then her bottom finger. For her other arm, we're going to go ahead and do the same thing, so under her sleeve and then down the back of her arm. And then I'm going to grab that little spot that I made for her elbow just to give it a little bit of a shadow area. And I'm again doing her bottom finger, and I'm going to go ahead and fill in her thumb since it's going to be in the back. Now I'm going to go ahead and go over that with my E21. And I'm going to fill in most of her arm, but I'm going to leave just a tiny dab of white space along the edge of her arm that we will go ahead and use our E00 to fill in. But I'm making sure to go over my E11 so that it will soften the edge of that line and not make it quite so harsh. Again, I've left a little line on this side of her arm so that I can go ahead and add my E00 last. And I'm just softening that edge of that E11. It was still pretty dark, so I went over it a couple of times. Now I'm going to take my E00 and I'm going to swipe over her entire arm. So I'm going over all of the previous colors and softening and smushing them all together. I decided that her arms, since they're above, they're kind of out in the open, they weren't going to need a second coat. They don't need to be as dark as her legs since those were under her skirt. So I'm only going to give them that one coat and then we're going to go on up here to her face. Let's go ahead and start with our E11 for our face, and I'm going to go ahead and start in her ear. I'm going to add a little bit of my E11 along the line in her ear and along next to her face because it's going to be darkest there. And then for her bangs up here, I'm just going to go ahead and flick a little bit of color along the edge of her bangs and the side of her face just to give it a little bit of color, and then I'm going to go long down the bottom of her face down to where her neck meets her sleeve or her shirt. Same for this side. And then for the bangs up here again, I'm just going to flick a little bit of color away from her forehead and down onto her face. When I get down to her eye, you want to make sure to avoid that white space right there so that you don't color it in. And then I'm going to go ahead and color along the side of her face down to the bottom of her neck. We're going to color that all in. I thought since her hair is falling over her face, it'd be a little bit shadowed over there, so I went ahead and add that in. And then I gave her a little space for nose right there. I gave it a little line. I'm going to color on the right hand side of that and the other side of her nose down there at the bottom. And then she's got a little space underneath of her lip for an indentation. I'm going to give that a little dab of color. I'm going to go ahead and switch to E21. We're going to again use E21 to soften the edges of our E11. So I'm going to flick over my E11 on her ear and I'm going to fill in the bottom section of her ear and leave the top for our E00. And then we're going to go up here onto her bangs. Again, flick away from your E20 or your E11 down into the middle of her forehead. And I'm just softening that all up with my E21. Go along that edge. I'm going to end up filling this whole side of her face in because I feel that since she's got her hair all falling on that side of her face, that it's going to be shadowed and casting more of a shadow on that side of her face. And we're just going to go down here and we're going to soften up her neck. I'm going to leave a little dab of white just in the center of her neck down at the bottom and the end, but I pretty much fill it most of the way in. We're going to go ahead and add a little bit of color here along the edge of her cheek. There I am filling in her neck. And then this side of her face, we're going to go along that, and then underneath her lip and the little space I made for that, and over the top of her lip, because it's going to be a little darker in there. Then I'm going to go ahead and grab my E00, but I'm not going to fill her face all the way in because we're going to add some cheek color, and I'll want to do that after with my second coat when I come back through. So I'm just using my E00 to soften the edges of my E21 and filling in a little bit of space. You want to make sure when you're going around her eye that you're being careful not to fill in that white space. We want to leave that white, so I'm trying to be careful not to do that. And I left the edges of her nose white, so that will be where I add my second coat, so that it'll be a lot lighter there when I come back the second time. I'm going to go ahead and add my cheek color, so I'm going to start with my R20. I do my R20 on the closest, the edge there that's underneath of her hair. So I'm going underneath that little eye line and I'm adding most of my color right along the edge of her cheek and then pulling it out in kind of like a little triangle onto her face. Same over here, we're going to go underneath of her eye. I'm making a little swoop and then I'm going down in the triangle shape to add a little bit of that color in there. This side needed to be darker, so I just added a little bit more. Then I'm going to go ahead and use my R30 to soften the edges. I don't use too much of this. I'm just swiping a quick little couple swipes over the edges of my R20 just to soften it a little bit. I don't want to pull it out too far into her face, but I want it to be a little bit softer on those edges. Now we'll go ahead and we'll grab our E21 and I'm going to go over with my second coat. I'm just going to lightly swipe down and add a little bits of color where I want it to be a little bit darker. This side of her face is going to be in the shadow, so I wanted to add a little bit there. And then I'm softening a little bit of these lines that were still in her hair that I wasn't loving. Then we'll go down along the edge of her cheek and down onto her neck. her ear, above her lip, wherever you think there's going to be a shadow. And then I'm going to take my E00 and I'm going to swipe over her entire face. So I'm going to make sure to go over her ear just to soften that. And then I'm going to swipe back and forth over her entire face, being careful around her eye. We don't want to color that in. We want it to be white. And then swipe over all of the rest of her face. If you get some on her lips, it's not going to matter because we're going to color those pink. So if you get a little bit of this color on there, don't stress over it. We'll just go over it a little bit. I'm just swiping back and forth and smushing all of those colors together. This works best for me to soften everything up a little bit. Then I decide that her cheeks are I want it to be a little bit pinker. So I'm going to grab my R20 again, and I'm going to give them another coat. So I'm keeping it where I want it to be darkest. So I'm adding a little bit of my R20 along the edges, and then I'm doing a little triangle on this cheek. And then we'll start with a coat of color on our lips. I just swiped over both lips with my R20 and gave them a couple of swipes back and forth just to darken it up. And then I'm going to take my R30 and soften that cheek color just a little bit. Remember, you don't want to swipe over her entire cheek. I'm just barely going over the edges and softening them up just a little bit. I'm adding a little dab of that to my lips just to spread it out a little bit. And then I'm going to go back over those lips with my R20 again because I didn't think they were pink enough and I wanted them to be a little bit pinker. Now I'm going to take my E00 and I'm going to swipe over those cheeks for another coat just to soften the edges. I felt there was a few little lines right there on this side of the cheek especially that I wasn't really loving, so I'm just going to use my E00 to soften everything up just a little bit more. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to move on to her hair. For that we're going to use E53, 42, and E30. I'm going to go ahead and start with E53, which is my darkest. On each of her little pigtails down there, I'm going to give them a little V. So I'm just going to do a V in each little section of her braid. And then I'm going to add a couple of little lines to the hair that falls down. So I'm going to start at the top and I'm going to draw a little line from the top down to my little V's. Give them a couple little, this side's a little bit bigger, so I gave it 3 swipes, and then a couple up from the bottom just to add some color. And we're going to do the same thing for the other side. So we're going to do a couple little dabs in those V's. And then we'll add a couple of stripes of color coming down from the top of her head down to the bottom section there. I'm trying to figure out there how best to hold my pin. For me, it's best if I hold the pin straight up and down so that I can use just the very tip of my pin. But it's kind of hard sometimes to get it onto the camera that way so that you can see. I'm going to do the same thing with my E42. I'm adding a couple little dabs of color down here in each of the V's of her braid, and then I'm going to go ahead and add a couple of stripes onto the top of her hair to add a little bit more color in there. Same for this side. Give it a couple little swipes of color and a couple little swipes down here in my V's just to add a little bit of shadows in there. Then I'm going to go ahead and grab my E30 and I'm going to go over her entire hair with that just to blend everything together. So nothing fancy, I'm just swiping over her entire hair to cover it the rest of the way in. I can never get the little white streaks to look good for me, so I like to color their hair all the way in. But if you like how the little white streaks look in your hair, go ahead and just leave them on there however many you would like. I'm going to go back with my E53 and I'm going to add those dark lines back in. So I'm just going over the top of the lines I already put down, or in a little bit different place, it doesn't really matter, and a little bit of color underneath of each of the little ponytail wrappers, just so that there'll be some color down there on some of those little lines. Same for this side, a couple little streaks of color, and then we're going to call the hair all done. Now we're going to do her shirt and her socks. So we're not going to do anything fancy. I just want to add a little bit of shadows. So I'm using my C1 to add some color to her shirt. So there's a couple little lines for her shirt that show that it's crinkled. So I went over those, and then I'm adding a small line next to her dress so that it will look like it's casting a shadow. I'm going to go down the line that's in the middle of her shirt so that it looks like it's buttoned and folded over the top. And then I'm going to do exactly the same thing for this side. I'm adding just a couple little slashes of color on those lines, and then right next to a dress so that there'll be a little bit of shadows on there. And then where her hair is falling, I went ahead and swiped a couple little swipes of my gray color underneath of the hair so that it would look like it was casting a shadow onto her shirt. I left the other side white. For her socks, I'm going to fill in the inside of her socks with my C1, and then I'm going to go underneath of my little wrinkle there and down the back of her sock to add a shadow so goes into her boot. Same for that one, under the little wrinkles and then along the side. And then I darkened up the inside of her socks with a couple more dots of color just so they would be a little bit darker. Next, we're going to do her dress and her boots. For that, we'll use BG 09, 45, 53, and then B00. We're going to go ahead and add our shadows with our BG 09 first. I'm only going to use this a little bit, so I'm going to do the inside of her boots, and I do give them a couple of coats. I fill them in, and then I come back and dab them a couple of times just to darken them up a little bit. This is the inside of her boot, so I feel that it's going to be the darkest, so I'm just filling them in all the way, and then there I am coming back with my second swipe of color to darken it up a little bit more. You could also do a little bit of a dark W color under there, maybe W6, and that would darken them up too without having to swipe over it multiple times with the BG09. We're doing the same thing for the inside of her pockets. Her pockets kind of bunch out there away from her dress, so I went ahead and filled them in with my BG09. I'm going to do the accents on the bottom of her sleeve for her shirt. And then I'm also going to go ahead and color the little ponytail wrappers or her braid wrapper there at the bottom of her hair, this dark color, just so you'll be able to see them a little bit better. I'm also doing the buttons on her shirt. They were pretty small when I printed them out, so I just gave them a couple little dabs of color and then left them. And then I'm just adding my second swipe of color over everything just to darken it all up. Now we're going to go ahead and start with her dress. So for that, we're going to go ahead and grab BG 45. I'm going to do the top of her dress first, or the dress first. So I'm going to use this whole entire side of where that strap is. I'm going to color that all the way in. And then I'm going to keep my line consistent down that side of her dress by pulling away from the side of her dress out so it's kind of even. It's not completely even, but I'm going to go out as far as that line goes just so I keep it all consistent, clear to the bottom of her dress. So I went to the edge of her pocket there. We're going to do the same thing on the bottom part of her dress. And then I'm going to add a little dab of color to this pocket to get that started with the shadow over on that side. I'm going to switch colors. So I'm going to grab my BG 53. And we're going to use that to go about halfway across. So I'm just going along the edge of my BG 45, and I'm going to go about halfway out onto my dress. Yeah, about halfway. So out to where the little line for her shirt is what I'm going by. We're going to go on the other side of this pocket, clear down to the bottom of her dress. And it doesn't look very tidy, does it? Don't forget to add a little dab to her pocket. And then we're going to switch colors again. So I'm going to go ahead and grab B00. This time we're going to take up about 3/4 of our dress. So I'm starting on the edge of my BG 53, and I'm going about 3/4 of the way over on my dress to color some of that in a little bit. And it looks pretty ragged. Look at all those lines in there, but that's okay because we're going to go over it with a second coat. That's why I left the white line along the edge of her dress, so that will be the original color when we get done. So BG 45 again first. I'm going to go along the edge, but this time I'm going to go out past her pocket. So I want to go about halfway on her dress. So I'm pulling it about halfway across. See how this time I'm going around the pocket, so I'm making sure to go around all of that. And then we're going to pull that underneath section there out to the middle of her dress to soften it up. And then we're adding a little bit to our pocket. And again, I did the pocket about halfway this time. We're going to go ahead and grab our BG 53. So with BG 53, I'm going to start on the edge of her dress and I'm going to go over completely the BG 45. So I'm starting at the edges and I'm going out to about the edge of where I stopped B00. So I'm pulling all the way across her dress and covering it completely the rest of the way over to fill in all the colors I already colored all on the dress. So I'm almost to the very edge of my B00 when I stop coloring. Then I'm going to go ahead and fill the rest in with my B00. So I'm going to go ahead and fill the pocket in. I'm swiping over both of the previous colors clear to the edge. I'm going to do the same thing up here. We want to go over BG 45 and 53 and then go clear to the edge and fill it in the rest of the way so it's no longer white. And this time you can go ahead and fill in that second pocket. Since it's over in the lightest area, I waited until the very end to fill that in, and then it's only as light as one coat. And don't forget the top of your strap up there. I almost forgot it. And she's got a little bit of line still there from my BG 53, so I'm just swiping over her dress one more time just to soften those lines up just a little bit. Kind of smushes all the colors together and blends them out. We're going to hop down here and we're going to do her boots. So we're going to go ahead and start with BG45. I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit of color along the back side of each of her boots. So I'd say about 1/4 of the way in on her boot. I went clear down to the sole, and then you want to do the little shadow area where the boot folds over. Same for this boot, about 1/4 of the way in on the boot. I went out on there, don't forget the little shadow area, and then I'm going to give it a line along the bottom of her boot where the sole is going to be attached. If you get a little bit on the sole, it's not going to matter because we're going to color it W7 here in a little bit. Now we're going to go ahead and take BG53. We're going to go about halfway across. And I'm just flicking right on the edge of my BG45 and adding a little bit more color. I haven't went over the entire thing yet. I'm going to do that in my second coat. I'm just softening that edge a little bit and dabbing a little bit more color on there. And then we'll take our B00, and this time we're going to fill it in about 3/4 of the way. So I'm swiping clear across the entire thing over and leaving a little bit of white space at the very edges so that we can fill that in with our second coat, and it will be the lightest color at the end. So now we're going to go ahead and go with our second coat of BG45. I'm going to swab that on there. I'm starting at the edge of the boot and I'm pulling it about halfway across. So I'm using up more space. I'm making sure to go over the previous line so that it will soften it and blend it in with the BG53. A little bit extra down there on the bottom of her sole. Same for this side, about halfway out. I'm making sure again to go over the top of where I stopped with this color the first time. We'll come in and we'll add our BG53. So again, this time I'm going to swipe over my BG45. So I'm going to start at the edge and I'm going to swipe about 3/4 away across my boot. I'm just softening all that color together and leaving a little bit of an edge so that we can add our lightest color on there, and that will make it have a highlight. We're going to go ahead and grab B00 and then we'll swipe over her entire boot to fill it the rest of the way in. You're going to make sure to go clear the edge so you fill all that white space in, and this will nicely soften up all these edges you have going on here by giving it a couple swipes of that lightest color. I'm trying to be careful there so I don't go outside of the lines. I get a little crazy sometimes and go out of the lines, so I try to be a little bit careful at the end. Alright, so W7, we're just going to use our W7 to give it a little bit of a sole on her boot. Again, nothing fancy. I'm just going to go along with the tip of my pin and I'm going to fill that entirely in. Nothing too sporadic there. And then we're going to take C1 and we're going to give her a little bit of ground to stand on. So I'm trying to decide where I want to start. I'm going to start a little bit up off of the top of her boot and swipe it across there, and I'm just carefully going over it so I don't touch her boot. I kind of swipe from one side to the other side so that it gets skinnier. If I start at her boot and swipe away from the boot, for me, it gets a little bit skinnier out at the end. Now I'm adding a second coat, so I'm just very carefully going around the edges of my boot and darkening it up a little bit. I'm not going to go clear out and cover up the entire thing that I already colored. I just want it to be a little bit more shadowed with a second and third coat right next to her boot without having to switch colors. I was kind of cheating there. I didn't want to go get out another color, so I just went ahead and darkened it up by adding multiple layers of the same color, and that will help you out to get more shadowing in there without having to buy another color. Now we're going to hop up here and we are going to do this butterfly up here. So for the butterfly, we're going to use Y23 and Y26. Alright, so we're not going to do anything fancy. I'm going to take my Y23 first, and I'm just going to color the entire butterfly in. I know, pretty fancy, right? Just color the entire thing in and make it the lightest color first. I'm doing it backwards this time just so that we don't have to spend so much time on these little dinky butterflies. Next, I'm going to go ahead and grab my Y26, and I'm just going to give them a little bit of shadow on both of those big wings. So I'm kind of swiping up on the back side of the wings so that the top of the wings will be the lightest and have a little bit of highlight up there at the top. I'm giving it a second coat just to darken it up a little bit more so you can really see that shadow there at the bottom of the little butterfly wings. So now we are going to go ahead and we are going to do the girl's hair with some sparkles. So I'm going to take my Spica glitter pin in clear, and I'm just swiping over some of those extra lines that are on there, adding a little sparkle down in where the braid is. I'm kind of willy-nilly putting it on there. I'm not really keeping it in any kind of order, but it does add just a little bit of sparkle that you can see, maybe a little bit on her bangs. We'll add those in there and then swipe down along the other side. And we'll go ahead and add those on this side. See how I'm not really staying within the lines? I'm just kind of flicking the sparkles on there however I feel like it. Nothing too spectacular or fancy about it. Just a little bit of sparkles to make it shiny and pretty on there. Then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to grab my Wink of Stella brush pen in clear. And I'm going to add that to my butterfly up here at the top. And I add a couple of coats onto that just so that you can have a bunch of sparkles and shine up there at the top of my butterfly. And mine already has the sparkles in there. I don't think I ever squeeze this poor pen, and it just continues to give me sparkles, but I just put a couple of coats on there until you get as much shine and sparkle as you want. You could add multiple layers on there. Alright, so now we're going to go ahead and use our Sharpie white paint pen to add some decorations to our pocket. I didn't like how the gold pen had made the little dots on there on the first image, so this time I'm going to use this to add a couple of little hearts to our pocket, just to give it a little bit of character and some decoration on there. You can't really see that heart very well because the pen is not working the way I would like it to. When you push down on these pens, they tend to blob out all over the place, so I'm trying to be careful by drawing a line on there, and it's just not working out very well, even on this side. So I decided if I maybe dotted my pen up and down like when I do the dots, it would work better. And here in a second, when I show you, see how much darker it is? Worked out much better. So I'm doing the same thing over here. I'm just dotting my pen up and down and darkening up those hearts so you can really see those. I think she turned out really cute. So there is our finished girl with butterfly. Isn't she totally cute? Again, I will go ahead and put a link to the girl down in the description box along with everything else I used in case you would like to pick something up. Otherwise, I hope you are having a fabulous day. If you have a question, leave me a comment down below and I'll make sure to get back to you. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the thumbs up button. I really appreciate it. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.